those pieces. So just really excited to be the executive director to now. And I thought I'd just pass it over to Valerie just to introduce herself as well.
Great, thanks Melissa. And I'm really glad to be here with all of you today. My name is Valerie Roof. I am one of the staff reviewers. So my major part of my time is spent looking at all the applications that come in and working with commissioners to go through those. I've worked for the commission for a little over 8 years now. Prior to that, I served as the executive director of a land trust in Michigan. So I am happy to be here, happy to make the move partway across the country and be in the more in the New England part of the country. So again, thanks for having us today.
So we thought we'd do a couple things, but do definitely want to hear from you. So I thought I'd just go over, big picture, what the commission's been thinking about and what our response to these times has been. And then pass it over to Valerie to talk a little bit more very specifically about some of those requirements questions that we've been getting from land trusts. And I really appreciated all of the feedback that you provided to Rebecca before this call, because that really helps us be able to answer your questions the best we can. And we also got a couple other more, applicant-y, non-COVID-y type of questions. So Valerie will talk about those as well after that. So, but more than happy as you're kind of going through, if there's questions, do please add that in the chat and we can stop and answer those questions along the way. So first, I thought I'd just kind of give you the big picture of what the commission's response and thinking has been in these times. So as soon as we I saw some of that writing on the wall that said, okay, wow, we're going to be working from home. And we all sort of have these stay-at-home orders. That impacts people and that impacts all the people across the land trust community. So the first thing the commission did, really early on was we took immediate action. So this is mid-March, which feels like 3 years ago at this point. We took immediate action and gave some extensions. So this is not something we've never done before, just to give blanket extensions across the board. But we really wanted to, know that it was going to take some time for people to understand what this kind of, adjusted situation looked like. So we really gave extensions to organizations who were renewing in the spring, to the first time applications, and all those organizations who've been in process, and some information was due soon back to the commission. We've also been able to kind of extend that, and for those organizations applying later, that fall round this year, we've been able to give them early access to the system to give them that more time in the application system than they might otherwise have. So that was kind of the very first thing. I think as soon as I said, okay, we're gonna be working from home, is all my staff, can we do that? Okay, now let's give extensions. I think that was probably like 2 days later. But since then, what we've been really doing is we've been really trying to listen to land trusts across the country to make sure we really understand what some of their concerns really are, because we really understand that, what we might be feeling in upstate New York and what you might be sensing in Connecticut might be really different than land trusts might be feeling in Montana or Texas or Washington state. So we wanted to make sure we really understood all of that. So we've been having direct calls with land trusts. We've been sending out targeted emails. We've been having these types of regional conversations with land trusts across the country. And again, we're committed to keeping up with that listening, because we understand that what we know today is very different than what we knew last month. And that's going to be really different than we know 6 months from now, or maybe even a year from now, about what the long-term look of what we're feeling right now actually is. So coming out of that listening, we've learned sort of 2 major things. And you'll see we'll be coming out with some e-news, and we've just posting some things on our website. So some of this is new information that's being rolled out today. So again, not everyone really has the same concerns or needs across the country. So that suspicion has really been borne out by some of our conversations. And so really what the commission is going to be doing moving forward to respond to these times is, at this time, we can offer more customizable flexibility. So if a land trust who is in those kind of later 2020 application rounds, we can give them a little bit more time to respond in response to that kind of COVID-19 situation. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working with them to make some, if they need more time, to make some adjustments to those due dates if that's something that would be helpful to them. And for those land trusts, you know, we've heard from some land trusts that the accreditation requirements has actually made them, and particularly those financial health requirements, has made them more resilient to these times, and they're feeling like they're doing okay. We understand that that may not be the case for every land trust, and that some land trusts are feeling this very differently and are feeling much more financial hardship at these times. So for those organizations, we can work with them, and basically we're creating a system that we would be willing for those land trusts to break some of their accreditation fee into 2 installments to give them a little bit more time to be able to pay those fees. So we're going to be outreaching to land trusts really specifically to be able to have those conversations with those land trusts kind of one-on-one to see what needs they have. And those conversations will be happening in the next week or so to be able to have those direct discussions. And that we're also starting really that outreach for those 65 land trusts. And I know that some of you who signed up for today, we're going to be applying in 2021. So we're going to be outreaching to you all to have some of those same discussions. And it might take us a while. There's 65 of you and only a couple of us. So we'll be rolling those out kind of over the next couple of weeks. We can't make them all at once. So the second thing we've really been hearing, and I think this is some of the most questions that we've been getting from kind of across the land trust community, is really questions about the requirements themselves, to say, in these times, in these circumstances, I have to stay at home. How can I monitor my conservation easements? Or, wow, the stock market took a giant hit, and now I'm worried about my stewardship and defense funds. You know, I heard one organization who said they spent 5 years raising $60,000. It's a small land trust, and now they met the requirements, and those gains were wiped away basically in a week. And so, you know, these are real concerns, and, you know, how do we as a commission, and how are we going to be looking at those types of requirements? So the good news is we took all of that, and we are coming out. It's on our website today. It'll be in our e-news, and Valerie can give a link if she hasn't already. In the chat box, is we're coming and we have published some requirements guidance that really tries to answer some of those questions that we've been getting from land trusts. And Valerie will walk through a couple examples that really, I think, respond to some of your direct questions. But the philosophy is that the commission has always really understood that land trusts really operate in the real world, and real world things happen. So the stock market can crash, or you can have a volunteer who swore up and down that they did their monitoring, but they have no records, or, you know, an employee, you know, said that they did all the monitoring and there's no records of them after they left. So the commission has always really understood that the real world interferes with everyone's best plans. And so we have always had an opportunity in the application and for review teams to really be able to understand, and we call them kind of isolated and rare circumstances. And we're looking at an organization, particularly at renewal, kind of what their overall, you know, how they're meeting those accreditation requirements over that whole 5-year term. If you're thinking about accreditation as a first-time applicant, you know, we're really looking at, you know, overall, what's your current practice as you're coming into meeting those requirements. And if there's places where, you know, something happened, there are places in the application for you to explain that and to say, well, here's what we did, here's what happened, here's why this was different. So I think that's a lot of theory. So I think it really does help to talk a little bit about that in the practical. But I think some of that philosophy that underlines, you know, we understand, but you have to tell it and to explain it, you know, that's really that whole philosophy that really does underlie that kind of requirements guidance. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Valerie, and she can walk you through a couple specific examples.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. And I did want to note, one of the questions or comments that came in advance was, what are some best practices during a pandemic? So the first 3 documents that I posted in the chat have to do with some documents that the Land Trust Alliance developed, and they're related to financial management, stewardship, and board governance. So it's really those issues. What should you be thinking about during this time? And I think they're a great resource. And then Melissa mentioned our own publication that we're releasing today, and I put a link to that as well. But there were a couple questions that you all asked that we did want to show how this model that Melissa talked about, how it really works. So one of them was stewardship and defense funds. Those funds have dropped a lot with the fall of the market, and we no longer have the minimums that are required. So when it comes to your application, and the difficult thing is that when we talk to applicants, we talk to land trusts, some of you are ready to apply yet this year. Some won't be applying till next year. Some not even sure on the horizon when you will apply for the first time. So what we're proposing is that you think about ways to document whatever happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, and have some documentation about that so that whenever you apply, you'll have that information. So when it comes to stewardship and defense funds, document that you had, if this has been a drastic change for you, document that you had the funds that met the requirements before March 1st, 2020. So show us that you typically have had that, you've met that requirement. And then help us understand why you were not able to maintain those funds. It might be how much you lost due to the market, problems with the market. Maybe you've used some of your funds for stewardship that you hadn't in the past, some of those board designated funds. You might have had some fundraisers and those have impacted the organization. So kind of point us to what happened and when. And then one thing we want to make sure is that when it comes to a non-compliance and not being able to meet a requirement, that it's a conscious decision. So document that the board had a thoughtful discussion about the land trust financial situation. What's the risk of not having stewardship and defense funds at the required level? And then, make sure you have that board's thoughtful, deliberate decision of this is the way we're going to approach this for right now. We're going to dip into our funds, we're going to do something else, but make sure it's a decision that you can document, and then commit to future compliance. All these kinds of things flow into how do we determine that it's an isolated and rare circumstance that was caused by the COVID-19 crisis. So provide a board adopted plan to address the funding gap, or just something that says, here's what we're going to do about it. We know we didn't meet the requirement, but we're going to do something about that. So that's kind of, and as an aside, none of us know how long this is going to last or what the impact's going to be. So it's understandable that it could take longer than 5 years in some circumstances for organizations to be able to recoup some of those costs. But all that should enter into what you're providing. Then I'm going to shift to another question that came up, and it had to do with monitoring. And we get that question a lot. We can't get out into the field. We have a stay-at-home order, and those stay-at-home orders vary from every state. And in some states, like we learned in California, counties have their own specific rules and regulations for that. So we've got to understand when you come back to us at the time of application and say we weren't able to do our monitoring, we really need to understand what was the impact of that stay-at-home order. How did it keep you from being able to make those visits? Document that you were typically compliant. So if you were a renewal applicant, for example, if you're able to show that ordinarily you've been out there on those monitoring visits, then you're showing that this was a unique circumstance. Document the board's discussion, again, that you knowingly went into this and said, we're not going to be able to monitor our easements this year. And I did want to comment that the commission looks at monitoring based upon a calendar year, if you will. So if you monitored in April of 2019 and you ordinarily would have gone out in April of 2020, but you don't get out there till November, that's fine as long as you've got a visit, a documented visit within that calendar year. So it's not a 12-month that has to happen every 12 months. The other thing that would be helpful is if you could explain any alternative steps that you took. So we're not able to get out and do our monitoring. So we looked at some satellite imagery. You might have incorporated that into your approach. You might have prioritized the highest risk properties. These are the ones that, as an organization, you decided these are the highest risk for violations of our easement terms. So instead of trying to get out to do all of the easements, we prioritized because we didn't have time to go out and do all of them. So again, your circumstances are going to be unique to you, and the more you can explain that to us and what has been the impact, then the better we're able to, as a review team from somewhere else in the country, we're able to understand your circumstances and why you are, why this is really an isolated and rare non-compliance. So I'm going to, there was one other question we had about requirements, and that had to do with, do we anticipate any major changes in criteria for re-accreditation, such as risk management planning? And in terms of new requirements, there will not be any new requirements. Of course, as an organization thinks about, I mentioned, as you're thinking about areas where you might not be able to meet the requirements, you want to look at the risks of those and just better understand that as you go ahead. But no more new requirements just based upon this. We do go out annually with some modifications.
I'm in a meeting. Can you come up and get it? Thanks.
But we'll be able to address those at that time, but nothing based upon the pandemic. So with that, if there are other questions, or Melissa, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I would love to see if people had questions that they wanted to, add in the chat box. So we can just pause, and we're happy to talk about other requirements as well.
Yeah, so if you can all just, if you have questions, put them in the chat box, and then Rebecca and or I, we'll take turns reading them off. If you want to put your screen on, and if we can call on you for follow-up, we'll do that. But, just let's funnel them through the chat to start and see how it all goes.
While people are thinking about typing, I did want to just kind of follow up a little bit and say, the guidance that we put out is, responding to the questions that we have heard to date, but understanding that we may not have thought of everything. And as time goes on, we very likely will get different questions and more questions. So we're also committed to updating this on a periodic basis. So if there are new questions or new things that need to be added, this is not a done. We hope that this is really more of a living document, and it's formatted really as kind of questions and answers, so that way we can easily add to it to answer your questions as we go through.
Melissa, we've gotten two questions coming through. One from Cheryl Rakowski. Can you talk about re-accreditation versus accreditation under COVID? So I guess some of the changes that have happened. And
Yeah,
then,
and maybe she can add a little bit more context to that question, but I can speak just briefly. You know, so I'd say renewal again looks much more at a kind of an organization's how they've met the requirements over their entire accredited term. So when we're looking at an application and, you know, if it's coming in 2021, 2022, fall of 2020, you know, we will as reviewers take into context and say, okay, hey, what was happening on other parts of their accredited term versus what is happening in this slice of time that is happening right now. So I think that's a little bit of how we'll be looking at that. But if you're a first-time applicant, what we look at more is, you know, we understand that as an organization is getting ready for accreditation, that a lot of they improve and they change a lot of their practices and realize, oh, I need to be doing this differently. So as an organization is coming in for first-time accreditation, we look very much more at what their practice is like in that kind of immediate time prior to their application. So what happens if the immediate time prior to your application is actually during this kind of COVID time? We'll also kind of widen that lens a little bit broader and be able to, and what's really different about the first time application process is we have more opportunities. We still have an opportunity to have a phone call with the land trust. So that helps us be able to kind of talk through some of those issues and be able to ask for some of that documents and say, okay, well, you know, how else would have you done this if this wasn't COVID, if you still can't kind of show that other time frame before would have met the requirements. So, you know, specifically thinking about, you know, conservation easement monitoring, you know, we will take that into consideration. So let's see. I don't know if Valerie, if you have any more thoughts on that, or if Cheryl, that doesn't answer your question precisely, I'm happy to come back to that.
Melissa, do you want to take the one about the flexibility of payment of fees?
Yeah, so we're working through exactly, you know, what that will look like right now, but I wanted to be as upfront and honest about this as I can be. So we've always had, you know, we've kind of since the commission, we've basically, application fees are due at the time that your application comes in. And we've really heard from land trusts that will be, you know, a significant challenge for some land trusts. Other land trusts that is not seen as a barrier for them. But we wanted to be able to try and be responsive to those land trusts that, you know, we don't want that fee to be the sole barrier for them to apply. So what we would be doing is we'd be working with that land trust, and so we'd split the fee payments into two. So we'd still have, you know, half of it due at the time of their application, and then have that second half due, you know, and we'll work with the land trust, but, you know, within a 6 month, you probably at about 6 months out. We'd be doing a fee agreement with them. So that would be all written in writing so that they can understand, you know, kind of that whole process and that expectations for those fee payments. So it'll be a kind of a very detailed one-on-one conversation with that land trust, but conceptually that's how we'd be approaching that.
So I'll take Paul's question, which is a great question, Paul. If you have to draw down stewardship reserve defense account below the required levels, how long do you have to kind of replenish that? And I'm going to give you a very vague response and say it depends. So a lot of that is what you present back to the commission. It's hard for me to give you a response without, and I'm one of those who likes to dig down deep without understanding, well, how much are you talking about? And what's your ability to replenish those funds? And so all those things kind of enter into it. So when it comes time to apply, an applicant should really talk about, this is our feasible plan for replenishing this fund. And maybe that's in the context of other obligations that you have or other things that you're working on. So it's really the context that's extremely important. to how long it might take to replenish that money.
And I'll just chime in too, you know, sorry if there's a dog barking in the background. She likes to bark at inappropriate times. So I'd say that the 5, you know, I think, you know, land trust should expect, you know, to try and come forward with a 5-year plan, but understanding that, you know, the commission will take those facts and circumstances into account to say, look, is 5 years really not feasible? So I think that's the lens we would look for, is the, you know, I think you should be thinking about that 5-year time frame with some possible allowances for a little bit longer. I mean, it's not like hey, you get 20 years, but I think it's 5, understanding that may need to be a little bit longer.
Great. And then Connie asked a question about internal controls, and Connie, that's a great question. And in other groups, folks have talked about that, and I've heard them talk about using Zoom actually to open the mail and things like that. But so others might be able to chime in with their ideas. That publication that the Alliance put out on financial management has a whole section on internal controls that help focus on some do's and don'ts, like don't forward the mail to somebody's home address and things like that. So there are some concrete examples, but I think if other land trusts here have kind of already tackled that, they might be able to offer something. When it comes to accreditation, we'd look at it the same way as we would the other issues, and we'd want to know, have you documented kind of your change in procedure, that you're changing that for during this time? So if you're not able to segregate duties as well or something like that, document that, your board, the board's decision, and what kind of alternative measures you're taking to kind of guard against any of those risks. But I think if others have suggestions on that, now would be a good time to offer what you're doing in your organization.
Okay, well, people are thinking about that, because that is a very, very good question. I'll talk a little bit in response to Richard's question about mergers. So we understand mergers happen, and I think over the past couple of years, just across the country, not just Connecticut, I've seen mergers really be something that land trusts are pursuing. So when an accredited land trust does kind of merge with a non-accredited land trust, or even an accredited land trust, we do have a policy and procedure to how do we think about that. So the first thing is, you need to let us know that that merger has happened. And then we will work with you to decide, to try and understand kind of what that nature of that merger was. I think I've been kind of not astounded, but just like impressed with the creativity of the types of mergers land trusts do. They don't all look alike. Some are very almost like accepting of assets and really have no other kind of merger aspects. Other mergers really involve the creation of a brand new, almost different organization. So we do scale the types of documents that we would ask for based on the type of merger that it's going to be. So first thing, you let us know, and then we would ask for some documentation. But getting to your question about, what and how do we kind of look at that and like the relaxation of the requirements in terms of the merger. When it comes to merger, what the commission looks for is that the organization is doing its due diligence. And I would say that I don't think we would completely relax that due diligence look, because mergers do come with risk to the organization. And I'm more than happy to kind of speak with you individually about that as well if you have specific questions after this. But, so we do look that you are, looking at what you're accepting as part of the merger and doing that due diligence. So, have you thought at all and looked at all, was there any sort of title investigation? And have you looked at what the risk of, if there has been no title investigation on any of those properties, have you done some sort of update? Have you looked at that at all? Again, knowing that this is a risk assessment, because maybe they don't actually own that property, or maybe there's all these liens and issues with these properties that you'd really truly want to know about as you're accepting those in. Some of the other requirements related to mergers have to do with at least having some sort of baseline documentation report. So once that conservation easement becomes yours and it gets transferred or assigned, now you need to start doing that monitoring. So we always look to say, okay, as soon as it's yours, that's when the annual monitoring kind of requirements kick in. So you accept you do a merger in 2020, you better start thinking about monitoring that next year, that 2021. But you're going to need to have some sort of baseline documentation report, and what we're talking, like a minimal something, so you can at least be able to defend that conservation easement. And we would accept a plan to be able to bring those more up to the requirements if you need some more time to do that. But just accepting and having that deed with nothing to be able to defend that, we would then usually ask that before that merger, at least you had something, and that you've at least assessed what type of documentation does exist for those conservation easements. So it's that. I'd say that the commission does already look at mergers slightly differently than how you would be taking on those projects yourself. But I would say, that we'd still want you to be doing that work. And again, I'm more than happy to dive more into those nuanced details with you separately, or if more questions with this group around there. But
so I think right now, while you're all thinking of other related COVID-19 questions, there were a couple items that came in through the advanced questions, and I thought maybe I would just address those as while you're thinking of other things. But there was a question about, can we apply for a particular login ID, that there will be several different people entering information into the electronic. There's an electronic application for those of you who have not been part of the process yet. We don't want to use the ID of our executive director for everybody. And that's fine. With the system that we have now, everybody can, you can create as many of those as you need to get in. I think the system we had in the past, there was only one authorized user, but now you can, that's been expanded. So hopefully that will resolve that question. And then there was another one, a question about a summary of the various verification items which may be requested includes selected conflicts and selected management enforcement issues. Kind of what's the difference? What's that all about? So for those of you who have not been through the process, what we do is now at the pre-application stage, we ask a question about how many, or describe the instances of transactions with insiders. They could have been financial or land or easement transactions, and give us a brief description of those up front in that pre-application. And then we also ask that about management and enforcement issues. So what types of violations have you seen over the last 5 years? And what have you done to address those, as well as what kind of fee property management issues have you encountered, and what have you done to address those? So at the pre-application stage, we ask for a little bit of information about those kinds of things. And then as part of the pre-application review, we may select one or more of those to get additional information, to get documentation about that issue. So if there's an enforcement issue, we might ask then in the application, we might choose one of those, select one of those issues, and ask for information that you gave to the board, give us the monitoring reports, but we might ask for actual documentation. So at the pre-application stage, you're providing just a description and a summary of some of those things that have occurred. So I hope that answers whoever's question that was, but if not, please feel free to put something in the chat there, and I can go into more detail if that's requested.
Other questions? Up here, Sharon. Up there, what am I? Oh, okay. Great. So let's give you all just a couple of minutes and make sure there are no lingering questions that you want to type in there.
It looks like Henrietta has offered some suggestions on the internal controls. So there's some good concepts in there for those of you who are concerned about those.
Thanks, Henry. Great. And we'll go through this chat string of conversations here and questions to make sure that we've grabbed everything for all of you by way of follow-up.
So Connie had a question about strategic plans, and you know, I love plans. I like to make lots of plans, but I completely understand life right now is not conducive to some of those plans we all may have thought about 3 months ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and what are we expecting, particularly for those types of strategic planning elements. So the way the commission really looks at strategic plan, and I'm just flipping open my very well dog-eared copy of the requirements. So we are looking that strategic goals or a strategic plan be established by the board, and that the strategic goals or the strategic plan be reviewed by the board within the past 5 years. So as an accreditation reviewer, as I look, what we do ask for is a copy of the strategic plan and kind of when that was last looked at by the board. So I think, you know, and again, we're skimming those strategic plans, you know, to make sure we're really understanding what kind of the organization's mission is, what its goals are, all of that. So I would say as we're looking, you know, if I were to look at a strategic plan for an applicant that's coming in right now, I wouldn't look at that and say, oh, this is completely infeasible in this world. You know, but I think from a board perspective, I think the board would want to be looking at, you know, okay, well, what does this mean for us and our organization? But I don't necessarily know that as a commission, we'd be judging or really commenting on the strategic plan feasibility in these times. I don't know, Valerie, if you have anything else you want to add to that question, knowing you look at lots of strategic plans and reviews.
Yeah, I would concur that I don't think anyone would be reviewing that to determine, boy, can they really get that done given all the impacts of COVID-19. But I think that having organizations look at short term, if that's what you can see, then that's definitely what we would be interested in looking at. Short term, long term is fine.
And just to, Henrietta did add a clarification that yes, you know, it's that we do look at either strategic goals or a strategic plan. So it really can be either, that it doesn't need to be some full-blown strategic plan, you know, that we understand that organizations do approach those types of things very differently and find either of those approaches acceptable.
And I think there are a lot of organizations who are doing sort of that contingency emergency planning. And I think that kind of ties into everything else we've talked about. Having that kind of thoughtful approach is really important.
Other questions? Anything else? Any closing words from either Melissa or Valerie before we turn it over to Rebecca?
Just a giant thank you. You know, I am not astounded, but astounded. You know, I'm just super impressed by the commitment by land trusts, and in these times, how much land trusts do, you know, are really relevant, and that need of having outdoor spaces, those protected landscapes, those protected lands, really truly do matter, and having lands that are close by for people is really critical in these times and these days. And so I just want to thank all of you for being part of that, and being part of protecting those landscapes across the state. Connecticut is a very beautiful place and has some really amazing protected places due to all of you. So just really impressed by everyone's creativity in these times and collaboration. Again, having these types of meetings, pivoting from, having conferences, which I've always enjoyed going to in Connecticut and meeting with you all in person, to pivoting to saying, okay, well, we can't do that, so let's go to the next plan. And just really everyone thinking on their feet and working together and sharing resources is, this is what this community is all about, and just continue to be impressed by that. So just a heartfelt thank you to all of you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thanks for being here. I think with that, are we seeing any other questions coming in? Just a comment, looks like from Bob from Ecken Road from Newtown. This is just a great opportunity for getting more information during these trying times. We're a small all-volunteer nonprofit, and we have seen a big increase in property usage and an opportunity to share who we are and what we do. Well said, Bob. Thank you for sharing that. And so thank you, Melissa and Valerie. I'll just turn it over to Rebecca for some closing words. And thank you all so much for joining us today.
Yeah, so again, thank you, Melissa and Valerie, and thank you everyone for coming out and sending your questions ahead of time and helping us plan these sessions for you all. I do want to let you know the recording's going to be available on our website. I'll be sending out a follow-up survey, which I would love if you take. That helps us sort of develop our next few months of programs and things down the line to help you best. It'll be a quick 5-minute survey. And I'll send out some of the resources and links that were mentioned in the chat as well. And then just wanted to pitch a couple of our upcoming programs. Tomorrow, Judy Anderson is going to be with us talking about what to do if your fundraising and engagement events have to either move to a virtual platform or need to be restructured. So I'll send the link for the RSVP page for that as well. So hope you can make it to that. And if you find that after this conversation, some governance questions have started to come up, things about how you're going to do your board meetings or what have you, next week, May 7th at 12:30, Connie Manis is going to be doing a governance Q&A with us as well. So hope you can join. I'll send that link as well. And thank you all for coming.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day. We'll see many of you tomorrow, I'm sure. Thanks for all you're doing. And thank you again, Melissa and Valerie. So appreciative of the time.